Trump come to power throughout his career, no interest in a two-state solution or helping the Palestinians in any way. And Israel has long had this policy of what they call hasbara, which is basically lying in the cause of diplomacy. 200 Palestinian journalists have been shot dead. It's the largest mortality of journalists in any conflict in modern history. Mass slaughter that we've seen over the last few months may yet bring a Palestinian state.
Hello and welcome to Tracking Trump on deKoder. I'm Nidhi Razdan. This week we're focusing on the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Gaza, a crisis that has laid bare the world's failure to uphold its moral responsibilities, a crisis that has seen Israel deliberately starve little children with the support of the Trump administration, and something that has finally led to some condemnation by other Western powers. The October 2, 2023 attacks on Israelis by Hamas were strongly condemned by the whole world. The murders of innocent people can never be justified. And as expected, Israel responded forcefully by attacking Gaza and going after Hamas leaders. But this war has turned into a completely disproportionate use of force by Israel, one in which over 60,000 Palestinians have died, where Israel's move to cut off food aid to Gaza has resulted in what the World Health Organization has just described as alarming levels of malnutrition. The head of the WHO has called it man-made mass starvation. The UN Secretary General has called Gaza a moral crisis that challenges the global conscience. And yet, Israel has denied that it is responsible for any of this. They blame Hamas for stealing food meant for civilians. But obviously, many world powers are not buying Israel's version any longer, including the UN, the WHO, and even France, Britain, and Germany that have been issuing strong statements in recent days. In fact, 28 countries in late July issued a joint statement which said the following. It said that we condemn the drip feeding of aid and the inhumane killing of civilians, including children, seeking to meet their most basic needs of water and food. It is horrifying that over 800 Palestinians have been killed while seeking aid. The Israeli government's denial of essential humanitarian assistance to the civilian population is unacceptable, and Israel must comply with its obligations under international humanitarian law. This is the first time we've seen such a strong joint statement, and now even Donald Trump has said that the starvation in Gaza is real, something he was not saying earlier. So how did the situation in Gaza become so dire? In March, Israel cut off all food supplies to Gaza and stopped the United Nations from distributing food there, as was the case earlier. Then Israel changed the rules in May and gave private contractors the responsibility of handing out food. But to get to those designated food sites, Palestinians often have to walk for miles and miles through dangerous areas, and many just can't reach there. Hundreds of others have been shot dead by Israeli soldiers along the way, as the crowds often get chaotic because they're trying to get food. The food distribution is being done by what is called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, a group headed by an American with close ties to the Trump administration. Human rights groups have strongly criticized its approach as being militaristic and lacking in humanity. Well, joining us today is someone who has been an outspoken critic, not just of Israel, but of the entire Western world's approach to this crisis. Author and historian William Dalrymple joins us today from London. Thank you very much, William Dalrymple, for being with us.
Nice to see you, Nidhi. Thank you.
I wish it was in better circumstances, but
this is not a happy story. It's certainly true.
It's not a happy story. And how do you think we've reached this point, where we are now seeing these images every single day of little children literally starving to death in Gaza, and it seems like the West and the rest of the world is really only now waking up to this?
Well, it's a sort of perfect storm because there's all sorts of different factors which have coalesced. To take the longer view, obviously the Palestinians have been in Gaza since most of the population of Gaza is refugees kicked out of their homes in what is now Israel in 1948. And it's very important to give that as the essential background. A year after the partition of India, while there were still refugees crossing borders between the new Pakistan and India, as part of the same chaotic flight from empire, the British announced that they were pulling out of Mandate Palestine. When the British came to Palestine in 1917, there was only 5% of the country was Jewish. 95% was Christian and Muslim. And under British rule, this declaration was made, the Balfour Declaration, which allowed for massive increase in Jewish immigration, so that by 1948, when the British pulled out, a third of the population was Jewish, and they were better armed and better organized, better educated than the indigenous Palestinians, who were largely peasants living pastoral lives in small villages and towns. And most of them, 200,000 of the 750,000 refugees, ended up on the barren sand dunes of Gaza, which had previously been a rather small, though very ancient town. And what we've seen over the last few years is a particularly right-wing government take power in Israel, propped up by the most extreme elements. The equivalent in India is, if you could imagine, a coalition that was propped up by, I don't know, Bajrang Dal and the most extreme elements of the far right in Indian politics. And at the same time as that's happened, we've seen Trump come to power in America. Who has shown throughout his career absolutely no interest in a two-state solution or helping the Palestinians in any way. We've seen in Britain a Labour Party where the wing of the party, which is very pro-Israel, and which came to power after kicking out Jeremy Corbyn, who was very pro-Palestinian. So at all these different points, if you like, we've seen over the last couple of years a series of circumstances come together, also in the press, where we have a series of editors and news owners in this country, but also around the world who are particularly pro-Israel. So you have the most extreme Israeli nationalist government that is determined not to allow a two-state solution, coinciding with an American administration which is least interested in solving the Palestine problem and bringing justice to the Palestinians, a world media which has never been less interested in the Palestinians, and also in the Arab world. We've seen the signing of the Abraham Accords, where countries such as Dubai, Abu Dhabi, the Saudis, Bahrain, prepared to make peace with Israel without first solving the Palestinian issue, and in a sense,
so can I
prioritizing their own prosperity. So it's a perfect storm of all the worst circumstances, which is why when the Israelis have made very public their intention to starve and make the life impossible for the Palestinians, to destroy 60% of Gaza, literally flatten it and make it impossible for the Palestinians to remain, there hasn't been the appropriate response. And I think the West is only waking up in the last couple of weeks even to the fact that these very genocidal statements which have been made since October the 7th actually do mean starving the Palestinians to death. And I want to say that, Gaza.
Even though officially Israel says that it's Hamas that's stealing the food and there's no policy of starvation, you have had senior ministers and members of Mr. Netanyahu's government who've actually gone on record to say it is very much their policy to starve people to death.
From the beginning, that you're quite right. This is completely open. That's the important point. I mean, you can pull together, and indeed the International Court of Justice did pull together, 2 years ago, 200 or 300 quotes from senior Israeli ministers, which made entirely clear that they wanted to make life impossible for the Palestinians so that they would leave and in the Israeli terminology, transfer out of Gaza. And the lack of public criticism from Israel's allies has allowed them to pursue this with only the most sort of basic PR denials going on from the official spokesman. And Israel has long had this policy of what they call hasbara, which is basically lying in the cause of diplomacy. And so there's been, on one hand, spokesmen denying starvation, while at the same time government ministers in power have applauded it and asked for it to tighten.
Absolutely. Which brings me to the other interesting development in the past week, which was that you had the French government saying that it was going to recognize a Palestinian state. And now Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, has said that the UK will also do the same if Israel does not agree to a ceasefire by September. Give us a context to this historically. Why is this important, or is it just symbolic? Why does this matter?
Well, I gave a brief sketch earlier that when the British first came to Palestine, it was 95% Palestinian, only 5% Jewish. There should have been, as the only solution by the 1940s, when so many helpless Jewish refugees escaping the Holocaust turned up in Mandate Palestine. At that point, it was very clear that there would have to be some sort of partition and division of the land if the two peoples didn't want to live together. Partitions, as we know from India, are very clumsy and bloody things, and only to be resorted to in a worst case scenario. The ongoing conflict between India and Pakistan is testament to that. But since then, the world, under, first of all, American pressure in 1948, recognized the state of Israel. But the Palestinians were so disorganized, and they just finished something called the Palestinian Revolt, which from 1936 to 1939 led to the exiling of the entire Palestinian nationalist leadership, the disarming of all the Palestinian villages, and the destruction of their military capabilities. So that when the British pulled out in 1948, there was no Palestinian leadership, there was no Palestinian parties to form a state, there was no organized Palestinian militias of really any size to take on the very well-organized and well-educated and well-drilled Jewish militias, which were then unleashed to expel the Palestinians. So there should obviously have been some sort of partition, and there should have been a Palestinian state declared at the same time as Israel declared itself, when David Ben-Gurion stood up in Tel Aviv and declared the birth of the state of Israel. That was the moment there should have been a Palestinian state.
So does it matter now when Macron and Starmer say that we'll recognize a Palestinian state, or is it symbolic?
It's of course matters. It's a crucial step, but it should have happened 80 years ago. It shouldn't be happening now in 2025. It should have happened in 1948. It's as if Pakistan happened, but that India in 1947, but that India never declared its own independence. Like you had on the 14th of August, you had the Pakistani state being declared, a new state in land which had just been, much of it, ethnically cleansed. And then, imagine if 80 years later there still was no state of India. That's the parallel
right.
to make from an Indian perspective.
We saw the American president.
The Palestinians have obviously a right to a state. They were 95% of the population. And why 80 years later we're still in a situation where we haven't recognized it? And shockingly, the British government is putting conditions on the recognition of state. This is something they should have done 80 years ago, and is obviously the right of the Palestinian people.
We heard Donald Trump finally say this week that the starvation stuff, as he put it, is real, and you can't fake this. As he put it in his eloquent words. How much does that matter? And do you think he would realistically put pressure on Netanyahu to walk back on this policy of starvation, or do you think he's just been forced to say it because there has been so much horror and condemnation from around the world with these images coming out of Gaza? And how do you see this playing out with the Americans? In a way, is this the true test of Trump's foreign policy?
So it's a difficult situation, because Donald Trump obviously lives in his own bubble. He's only watching Fox TV and reading very right-wing newspapers, and mainly relying on a very filtered version of events. And I think that it's quite possible that he's not getting the briefings telling him exactly what's going on. Now, it's no coincidence that he made this step. He was away from his inner circle in Scotland, surrounded by politicians who said, belatedly, but at least finally made the point that that starvation was a very real thing. And I think everyone he's met on his visit to Scotland emphasized the horror ongoing. And I think, Trump, you have to somehow get inside the Trump bubble. And Keir Starmer, though I'm no particular fan of his, managed to get a working relationship with Trump, dangling baubles like royal visits, and did establish a relationship with Trump, whereby Trump was listening to him and regarded him in Trump speak as a good guy, and has made the case. Starmer himself is no great pro-Palestinian. He's the wing of the Labour Party in England, which rose over the defeat of Jeremy Corbyn, who was very pro-Palestinian. He is married to a Jewish wife. His wife has cousins fighting in the IDF, and so he's one of the most pro-Israeli Labour leaders. Nonetheless, the Labour Party's policy is to recognise a Palestinian state and to move towards a two-state solution. And I think Starmer, by the look of it, genuinely has been affected by the horror of the photographs we've been seeing, both of the destruction of Gaza and the levels of starvation and these terrible pictures of Palestinians having to go to this American-run aid distribution system where they are massacred at a rate of 100 a day at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think Starmer did make the case to Trump in a way that I suspect many people have not done to Trump. Trump has the most pro-Israeli, pro-Netanyahu administration we've ever seen in the United States. The welcome that Netanyahu, despite war crimes accusations from the International Court of Justice, received when he visited Congress and throughout his visit to the States, meant that I think Trump is in a bubble where he's simply not getting the facts, either about history. As we know, Trump's grasp of history is from what he said about Pakistan and Israel being enemies for tens of thousands of years, or whatever he said.
Pakistan and India,
his understanding of history is not as sharp as some leaders, shall we say.
Yeah, but I mean, you made an interesting point earlier about the way the media has covered this crisis. And I found it really interesting that this week you had the BBC, I think it was AP, Reuters, there was a joint statement they put out that their own reporters on the ground they're not getting food. Let's talk a little bit about that, because there's been a lot of criticism of the way the Western media has covered this story. I also know it's very difficult to get into Gaza because you need to do it through the Israelis, and they just haven't had access. The press hasn't had access. But, in today's information age, a lot of stuff has been getting out.
It's a unique situation, whereby all the press have been banned, other than a handful of hand-picked ultra-left and literally a handful of journalists in Gaza since October the 7th. And so everyone has been relying on Palestinian freelancers and Palestinian journalists who have been being picked off. I think 200 Palestinian journalists have been shot dead. It's the largest mortality of journalists in any conflict in modern history. And those that still are alive to record what's going on and who haven't yet been killed by Israeli snipers, the Israeli PR machine has done its best to rubbish what they're saying and to deny that they're credible sources, as if somehow Palestinians are not human beings and not worthy of being listened to in the same way as you listen to any other journalist. And that's been largely successful. I mentioned earlier that this is this perfect storm of the most right-wing Israeli government, the most right-wing and pro-Israeli American government, the most right-wing Labour Party we've ever seen, all very much on the pro-Israeli level, so allowing Israel to carry out these atrocities. The same is true in the BBC. The BBC management is now full of placemen who were put in by Boris Johnson, and who are very much from the pro-Israeli, the most pro-Israeli elements in British media. And there's this guy called Robbie Gibb, who owns the Jewish Chronicle, and who is a fanatical evangelical Christian supporter of the far right Israeli government. And so we've seen. While obviously the BBC is a vast organization with many very good people working in it, we've seen pressure from the top for example, every statement from Hamas, from the health ministry in Gaza is amended. The Hamas-run health ministry, but we don't learn every time that Netanyahu appears on screen that the ICJ indicted war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu. So we're getting increasingly under BBC rules a bias in favor of Israel. And it's really, I think, only when their own correspondents have started reporting that they're starving to death that the BBC is beginning to wake up. We've seen a marked shift in BBC coverage, I think, over the last week. That said, there have been some people in the BBC, individuals who have been very bravely reporting at their own cost and risking their lives throughout. As I say, it's a vast organization, and you can't make generalizations about the whole body of journalists. But certainly the management has been particularly timid. There was a particularly good documentary on the Israeli campaign to arrest and murder the most qualified surgeons and doctors in Israel, called the Israel's War on the Doctors, which was commissioned by the BBC and then never shown. Eventually, it got released both by Channel 4 and Zateo, and I recommend anyone that wants to really understand the depth of the horror going on in Gaza to get that video. It's now online, can easily be watched, and I highly recommend it.
Just a last couple of questions, William Dalrymple. One is on India's own position on all of this. You live in India half the time, and the fact that India has traditionally been walked a fine line on this issue, but we've become closer to Israel in recent years. But we haven't been able to speak up for this moral crisis. I mean, morally, I really do feel we should have, and we're just kind of on the fence. How do you feel about that, about India's position?
I think India now is very divided on this issue. Obviously, in Nehru's time, Nehru was one of the first to recognize the Palestinians. There's been a full Palestinian embassy in Chanakya Puri since the 1940s. It's no secret that the BJP has always been much more pro-Israeli. It's only under the BJP that we saw an Israeli embassy opening in Delhi. It's now a major arms supplier to the Indian army. There are many, many Israeli arms dealers and so on living in India now, and they are very influential with elements in the BJP. This is not news to anyone. This has been going on for a while, and we've seen often that that is supporting Israel's war on the Palestinians, and there are elements in the Indian right that obviously regard Palestinians as being the same sort of people as their Pakistani enemies. There's been a sort of what's the word? Many elements in India today that do identify with Israel and see it as another nation facing an Islamic bloc. And so there's been a great deal of support, not just from the Indian government, but I think increasingly from Indian people at large. And like everything in India, it's now a right-left division, just like you see on any other issue in Indian politics. And so it's not a surprise, in a sense, that the government has edged more towards Israel, because I think we've seen the Indian people edge more towards Israel. I would very much hope, though, that now that these images are coming out very strongly of mass starvation, that basic humanity would lead people who have been up to now regarding Israel as the point.
I think that's the point, that I think it's about basic humanity. It's not about being a supporter of Hamas or
left or right or exactly.
Exactly. It's about basic humanity, which brings me to my last question. Thomas Friedman wrote an interesting piece in the New York Times where, he said essentially the bottom line was that this crisis in the Middle East isn't going anywhere. There's really no solution. You have the most extremist right-wing government, as you pointed out, in Israel. You also have a fanatical leadership on the other side in Hamas. And he made an interesting point that Hamas too knows that if it releases the hostages, the Israeli hostages it still has, that could go a long way in easing off the pressure on the Palestinian people. But basically his point was, when you have these two extremes, a solution, a real meaningful solution is going to elude us. Would you agree?
Well, I would certainly agree that as I said, we have this terrible situation where Hamas, who are a terrible organization who committed unbelievable atrocities on October the 7th, do still have armed force in Gaza, are still holding hostages. And at the same time, we have this very right-wing government in Israel, and the extremists are feeding off each other, as they always have. Netanyahu kept Hamas going. He was aware that Hamas would help his cause, because what he feared most was a moderate Palestinian government in Ramallah willing to make peace, hoping for a two-state solution. And he always knew that as long as Hamas was there committing atrocities, letting off suicide bombs, it was his best ticket to stop a two-state solution and to claim there was no partner for peace. I do not, however, share Friedman's view that it is impossible to come to peace now. I think that, as we saw in Northern Ireland, I mean, if anyone in my childhood had told me that Catholics and Protestants could make peace in Northern Ireland, I'd have laughed at them. We had figures like Ian Paisley on the Protestant right, opposed by Gerry Adams on the Sinn Féin / IRA left, who seemed completely irreconcilable. And by the end of that peace process, they were friends. They actually went to each other's houses and hung out. So peace is possible, and it's never felt further away. This is a particularly grim moment. But I think the fact that even Trump now acknowledges starvation in Gaza and has shown a measure of feeling for the sufferings of the Palestinians is a chink of light, and hopefully this is the beginning of with Britain and France now recognizing Palestine, and hopefully we can now walk back from this unutterable horror and something good come out, just as Israel came out of the Holocaust and got as much support as it did because of the unutterable horror of 6 million Jews being gassed in Nazi gas chambers. Maybe the unutterable horror of the Palestinian mass slaughter that we've seen over the last few months may yet bring a Palestinian state. One little correction. You said 60,000 Palestinian dead. Those figures, and I've talked to people who've been working on those figures, those figures are the number of bodies that the Palestinian Authority retrieves into its mortuaries. So if, for example, a tower block goes down and 20 people are lost under the rubble, those figures are not entered. So 60,000 is the bare minimum. Yeah. It's the number of recovered bodies. And obviously in any when you're attacking tower blocks, and every single tower block in North Gaza is gone now, hundreds are going to remain under the rubble, as is the tragic reality of any bombing of a tower block. So I think, the Lancet and various other, The Economist as well, have estimated the death toll at double or triple 60,000. I think we're probably going to talk around 200,000 dead as a realistic figure at the moment.
Well, William Dalrymple, thank you so much for coming and talking to us on what is perhaps the biggest humanitarian crisis of this century that we are seeing unfolding before our eyes. You do strike a note of optimism despite the grim picture, as you put it, that we see. Let's see how the story unfolds from here on. Thank you very much.
Nidhi, if I could say one last thing, I think another parallel with India, everyone in India knows the extremely complicated relations between Hindus and Muslims in India. It is a similar thing. And just like you've had moments of intense bloodshed in the relationship between India and Pakistan, and between Hindu and Muslim in India, there have also been long centuries of coexistence and a shared culture, shared shrines, and a commonality. It isn't that these two people have never got on and have never been in contact with each other, have never coexisted. The history of the Jewish community in Palestine is one of shared sacred spaces. Just like today you can go to Nizamuddin in Delhi and see Hindu, Christian, Muslim and Sikh all praying together in one place. There are similar places in Palestine. So there is a basis for reconciliation and for these two people to learn to live together, just like there is in India. And just like I'm optimistic, very optimistic for the future of India, I'm not completely pessimistic about the future of Palestine.
Thank you very much, William Dalrymple. Great to talk to you. Thank you. And that's it on the show this week. Great. We'll be back with another episode next week. Goodbye.